So in this short video, what we're going to take you through is the brief warm-up and loading strategies to build to a couple of reps in the power clean. So we use the RAM protocol, which is obviously raise, activate, mobilize, and potentiate, taking into consideration a couple of specific movement patterns you might need to warm up, considering the power clean. So we start off with raising the temperature with a brief couple of minutes on the assault bike just to raise the temperature, get some blood flow around the body. And we then moved into some simple mobility drills, nothing too complicated. We didn't want to spend too long, but the main aim is to move with intent. Because obviously, getting to a heavy lift and a power clean, you're gonna really need to focus on even the warm up lifts with the empty bar. So simple movement drills such as T-spine extensions on the bench. We work through a little bit of hanging from the bar just to open up the lats for a better rack position or front rack position. We then move to a little bit of bottom of the squat with holding a kettlebell in the goblet position just to open up the hips, any little niggles or any little restrictions that may be holding us up to catch maybe a little deeper in that power clean. Ankles, hips, and knees are always a good case to warm up. As we're moving forward, start to get a little bit more specific into the activate and mobilize part of ramp. So we're getting towards open up that rack position. Here we can see some alternating high elbows just with the bar on the back. This will increase that rack mobility, hopefully open up the lats, the triceps, getting the elbows a little bit higher. We then moved into some zombie squats, which are a fan favorite for me, where we really work that thoracic spine extension, and it takes out of the equation of having to have good rack mobility to get into the position. So the bar rests across the top of the shoulders. We really fight to keep that upper back extended. As we're slowly getting into it, we then go into some front rack salt press just to work that bottom position. You eventually get into a little bit of potentiation with some box jumps just to elicit that high multi-unit recruitment, and then finally work into some tall power cleans here. We eventually get into some barbell work. We work through a little bit of positional work, such as muscle cleans, mid hang power cleans, and we work through a little bit of positional strength with all the movements before we eventually get to some repetition work with an empty bar. So we will stay relatively moderate to high on the repetition because we don't want to fatigue ourselves too much before the main lift. But with empty bar, we try and go for maybe anywhere up to 3 to 5 reps, moving through each position. So position 3, position 2, and from the floor, and eventually the load and strategy. We start to get a little bit of load on the bar and start to decrease the reps as the intensity or the load in this case goes up. Check it out. So setup position. You can see that just initially before that lift off, we look to create a little bit of tension against the bar. So we're not sort of trying to yank the bar off the ground. What you can see during that first initial part is the arms do slightly bend, but then just before the takeoff, you can see you sort of take the slack out of the barbell, and that creates tension and allows the lifter to maintain basically a solid position of the upper back and also the hips a little bit higher than the knees. From there, as we start to move into position 2, we can see that just at the knee position, that bar does slightly get away, but we do manage to keep it relatively close to the body. So we transition right through to that extension. So position 3 is the high hang. What we're actually looking for at this point is the shoulders to be behind the bar, ready to extend vertically, which are pretty good. And then we look at the feet, should still be pretty close to the ground. You shouldn't be extending through the toes too early. And eventually for that shrug, an extension or a triple extension. Slightly get back towards that. You can see it's a violent shrug. We're onto the toes, maybe a little bit soft at the knees. So initially we could be cutting that extension just a little short there. In terms of the catch position, what you can see is the lifter actually catches the bar pretty high, which allows them to then maybe ride it down if they need to. But at this point, it actually doesn't look like the lifter needs to. And you can see the elbows have got to get in the high rack position. Otherwise, the elbows might have been a little bit lower there. So all in all, with that weight, not a bad lift. So We fast forward to a little bit of a heavier from a side angle. Same again, we create a little bit of tension against that bar, and that initially takes the slack out, and it begins to allow us to lift through that first pull. And you can see it keeps that sort of nice back angle there. Eyes are on the horizon, so that's pretty good. It doesn't affect sort of the torso angle or the hip angle. The hips are relatively higher than the knees, so we're not sort of behind the bar and maybe too over, and that keeps the balance in and around the midfoot. As we start to go to position 2, let's push back a little bit. You can see that for this one, we have increased the weight a little bit, but the bar now sits in and around position 2, which is around the knee. So should be getting ready to sort of fire the hamstring, similar to a bow and arrow for that triple extension. The feet are relatively grounded here. The shoulders are still over the bar. If we go a line straight down here, you can see the shoulders are in front of the bar. It's also a good cue to maybe set that up for beginner athletes. As we start to shift back now from position 2 to position 3 during the extension, the feet are still relatively grounded, which is good. That means the lifter isn't coming onto the toes too early. Once you've actually extended, now we should be at this point when the hips are coming through to go vertically, coming onto the toes. Good. Adding a shrug into the bar. Obviously the shrug, we can't really pull with the arms here, which is a good thing because pulling with the arms actually takes the acceleration out of the barbell. But what we also want to see is a violent shrug, because that's initially going to get some height on the bar alongside the triple extension to allow the lifter to get enough time to get underneath the barbell onto the catch. Same again, catching it relatively high, similar to the previous lift. The elbows are coming through pretty fast with a vertical torso angle. So all in all, again, a pretty good lift on that. And then moving into final weight, I think again we've increased the weight. I think you going towards the last one, we started to see a little bit of technique breakdown. So again, breaking the bar apart at the start, just taking the slack out of the barbell allows us to maintain them solid positions. As we start to move forward now to position 2, again, shoulders could maybe be a little bit more over the bar. So that's in essence there. The lifter is starting to pull the shoulders behind the bar maybe a little too early. Maybe you want to see maybe the shoulders being over the bar just a little bit longer there to keep the bar weight over the midfoot. But again, knees are getting out the way, which is definitely a good point to allow the bar to carry on at that sort of that bar trajectory path of like relatively close to the body that we want to see. As we're moving further into that position 3, this is where now I would say you might start to see a little bit of a heel lift, which does show in the catch position, which we will show in just a second. But relatively, or generally speaking, what you tend to see is when lifters come onto the toes a little bit too early, they're trying to produce more of like a calf lift rather than an actual jump through that triple extension point. So you can actually see that where the lifter might not get enough power into this one, and he maybe what you will see is to get pushed down really deep into the power clean catch as we start to drive forward. So you can just see from that position 2 there, the toes starting to shift. We're starting to shift the weight onto the toes, and the hips haven't really fully extended to a point yet. As we extend with the hips now, still getting that shrug, but obviously we put a lot of weight towards the toe area. And then during that catch now, the athlete really gets pushed down deep into that squat, because obviously they haven't really focused on driving through the hips. They drove through the toes, and that's basically forced change the power from the hips towards the toes, where really should be a lot more powerful on the hips, and that's forced us into a really deep catch position there. So all in all, pretty good lifts, a couple of things to work on, but again, that's all part of Olympic lifting.
Power clean, I'm going to take him through a couple of steps first to basically introduce the movement. First one I would introduce to is letting them know about the hook grip. Okay, so with the hook grip, it basically acts as a locking mechanism so the bar doesn't get away from the athlete when they're performing the power clean. So that would be thumbs around the bar, fingers around the thumb, sort of anchor on the bar technique. From there, Once we've set that in stone, it might take a little bit of while to get used to in terms of the hook grip. Most people do find it difficult at first, but with enough practice and repetition, it does become a little bit familiar. Next one we go through from there would be moving into the stance. So with the power clean, we talk about the jumping stance, just enough where it gives you a solid base that you can basically have structure for the upper body to sort of take off from. So if you were trying to take off from a wide stance, you wouldn't get enough sort of jump from the triple extension, basically, from the hip, knee and ankle. So now I'm going to set the athlete up. I'm going to tell him where you feel comfortable, but try and keep it within around shoulder or hip width. Yeah, and I'll get them to turn the toes slightly out so they can access a little bit more hip, knee and ankle stays online. That's your jumping stance or your takeoff stance. Play around with it within that shoulder and hip range. From there, landing stance, we're going to try and get them to try and stick within their squat pattern. Jumping stance, just inside. Landing stance, around somewhere with the squat, and the principles stay the same. You want the hip, knee and ankle to stay online. To add alongside the hook grip is our position of the barbell and where it's going to sit in relative to the body. So with the power clean, it's a little bit different than the snatch, where the snatch nicely sits in the hip crease, depending on sort of anthropometrics. If someone's got a little bit of longer arms, the bar might sit way down on the body in between sort of the thigh and hip crease. That's not a bad thing. If this is where they're extending from, that's okay. Some people with a little bit shorter arms, the bar might sit a little bit more within that hip crease. So that's fine as well, because obviously the bar is going to come at timing with the hip when they're about to extend. So these are some of the things that you can actually talk to the athlete once getting into that sort of position. But roughly, you would say within sort of the line of the shoulder moving down. So if I was to look at the bar from the side, just get a good visual. If I was going shoulder down to the wrist, roughly that would be sort of the grip to take. But what you can also add into that is get them to go into a full rack position from there. And if they can get their elbows up from that position over the shoulder, that's normally a comfortable position, because that rack position at the end is what's going to be the finishing position for the catch. But in essence, if we talk about the rack position, what we should find is at the top, bar rest across the top of the shoulders, and the elbows allowed to, or should be, in a position where they can stay relatively high relative to the bar. So maybe parallel to the ground, but that might be a struggle for some athletes. Probably one more thing before we start to go into teaching the full sort of power clean is going to tell, the athlete the difference between a power clean and a full clean. Perform that power clean, and need you to stop where the hips are either on line with the knee or above. Relatively, when you find them working with some athletes, they like to catch you quite high, so it's always good to inform them that even here's a power clean, here's a power clean, and even on parallel is a power clean. But obviously, your success rate of when you get further pushed down into the bar is going to be a lot better when you're catching it high versus catching it low. So adding a barbell or maybe even a PVC pipe into the athlete's hands, you've got to make sure that they are competent enough to figure out the feet in the catch position, because that is important in terms of keeping an upright torso, especially during the power clean. So a nice little 3-step drill we take them through is a little bit similar to one of the derivatives to fix a speed underneath the bar is a tall clean. And we're going to do a tall power clean. So step 1 would be resulting back to the jumping and landing stance. And all we're going to get them to do is go from the jumping stance position and land in the landing stance first. So it's going to be 3, 2, 1, drop. While I'm doing it, I'm going to be looking from a side view just to make sure, looking at the torso in relative to the hips, is it staying stacked? Did they open up the rib cage? Are they tipping forwards onto the toes? Where's the weight in the heels? There's a couple of things we need to be observing, especially for this drill. Once they're a little bit more competent in just dropping, we're going to add the jump into it. So this is a little bit more trying to replicate that triple extension and then landing into that position. So first one was just a drop with the feet, so just moving the feet out into the stance. Next one's going to be coming from the toes, just replicating that triple extension. Same again, we're going to go 3, 2, 1, I'll clap. We get them to pause on each one and maybe go around each athlete, checking sort of the torso position like we mentioned before. Where is the weight in relative to the feet? So asking them the questions, kind of come round with the PVC pipe, just checking at the upright. So if they're landing in that catch position from the toes, 3, 2, 1, drop. I'm having a little observation from the side, I can come to the side with the PVC pipe and place the PVC pipe next to them to make sure they are staying upright. They dropping a little bit lower, probably to piece it all together, just to try and put emphasis on it is a jump and it is a triple extension, and you will be landing into the catch. There is one thing though that does tend to go a little bit wrong with this drill, is when you go from just a drop and then you go from a toes to drop, what you're actually missing out on is when you add the jump into, the jump into this drill, they focus on just coming down with sort of gravity rather than forcing the feet down to the catch. So that's something to definitely reinforce with your athletes. So what we're going to go from is the third step. It'll be 3, 2, 1. I'm going to get them to basically jump, shrug, and drop. So it'll be 3, 2, 1, jump, shrug, and drop. Catch. Bit of a 3-step process. I'll demonstrate one of each for the last final time, just to show how it progresses over. So first one will be drop into the catch. Second one will be toes to drop. Final one will be jump, shrug, and catch. Now we're going to actually start to work our way through positions. So with the athletes, what I've done in the past and what I continue to do teaching it is take a top-down approach. Initially what this means is I'm going to go in reverse from the top, work my way down to the start position, and then go through it back so the athlete completes the full lift. So first position we're actually looking for, if we were to look for a top-down approach with the athlete, would be going from position 3 or the high hang position. This, in essence, is the position where they're going to go into that triple extension before they drop into the catch position. So a couple of things I'm looking for from here is the bar, like we said before, depending on anthropometrics, bar is going to be sitting either somewhere around mid-thigh or maybe at the hip crease. For me, it's around mid-thigh. Also what I'm looking for, the knuckle is going to be pointed down just to make sure that the bar isn't sort of sitting away or give us any opportunity for the bar to get away from us, as we're always looking to try and keep it as close as we can and make it as vertical and close as we can. So next thing from there is going to be the shoulders and relative to the bar position. So at this point, we're actually looking for the shoulders to be behind the bar because we want to put emphasis on that jump and shrug, but also the bar to stay close. If the shoulders may be a little bit in front and we went too early, that could in essence push the bar out in front and just deviate that bar path and push it forwards. Also, in this sort of position, obviously this is going to be the final extension, so we're going to be on the toes, but when we're teaching it or when I'm sort of going through it, I like to tell the athlete to keep the knees a little bit soft and just let that bar just sort of dangle and keep it as close as you can to the body there. In terms of the shoulders, what we talk about are the shoulders to be back and down, just so you can engage that upper back a little bit more through that connection with the triple extension at the top. In terms of where we want to tell the athletes to gaze, I'm just going to tell them to look forward through most of these movements, keep the eyes on the horizon. Now, once we've started to see some decent mechanics from the athletes at the position 3 or high hang position, then and only then would you then progress them to the next point of the power clean. Until then though, you might just get them to do power cleans from position 3, even raising onto some blocks just to go from just a high hang so they can practice that technique. So moving into position 2 is going to be the mid hang mid hang position 2. So from the high hang position, I'd always get the athlete to then work the way down. So they're always reinforcing position 3, but also position 2, going back and forth because all the positions are connected. At position 2, we always state to the athlete that, again, we're looking for a couple of points to happen. I wouldn't try and throw too many at them at first because obviously when you're learning Olympic lifting, there's so much information that you don't want to overcrowd them with all the information in the world that they're really struggling. So for a couple of maybe 2 or 3 weeks, you might just stick with the high hang. And like we said, once they start to show a little bit of progression from there, then and only then would you progress to position 2. So working your way down, what I'm actually looking for at the mid hang or position 2 is the bar to be just above or around that knee, okay? The changes that have happened is the shoulders are now slightly over the bar. The weight is still in and around the mid-foot, because I haven't slightly got into that extended position just yet. Eyes are still on the horizon. Shoulders are going to be down into the back pocket. That's definitely a great cue for an athlete to start to engage the upper back, just so they aren't sort of in that relaxed round the position. You can't get too much connection on the bar there to keep it close. Okay, knuckles are still going to be pointed down, elbows are going to be slightly turned out here. In terms of where we're going to try and feel this tension, always try and get the athlete to work from position 3. From there, just tell them to lead with the hips, keeping a soft knee, and just start to go to a point where you start to feel a hamstring tension. Now, an analogy always referred to is like a bow and arrow when they're going from position 2 into position 3 to go into that triple extension. Moving down to position 2 is loading the bow and arrow, and then from there, as you start to move back into position 3, that's actually releasing the bow and arrow, so the hamstring becomes a part of triple extension at that point. Also at this point, let them know that from position 3 into position 2, the hips are still going to stay relatively higher than the knees, just so you can maintain the hamstring tension, and just so you don't fall behind the bar and the weight shifts towards the heels, which could, in essence, push you back a little bit and maybe push you off your balance. Okay, so we'd always reinforce that position. So we've gone from position 3, it would then be a case of moving down, so it'd be down to position 2, see if they maintain the mechanics. It would then be up to position 3, see if they maintain the mechanics, and I get them to sort of move back and forth between the two positions so they can start to show a little bit of confidence in the movement before we eventually progress to the final position. So once we've determined that the athlete is ready to progress from 2, we're going to then move them down to the floor position, or basically the start. So position 3, then get the athlete to go down to position 2, position 3, position 2, and then we'd start to work down to position 3, maybe again after a couple of weeks, or maybe even a couple of days, position 3 and 2. So from here, as we start to move the bar down towards the ground, what you'll notice is a closing of the hip and obviously a closing of the knee, and that's fine. But as long as they stay, pretty much, they're going to stay the hip relatively slightly higher than the knee, just to create a little bit more balance around the midfoot where the bar should be sitting also. So as you move down, we're going to tell them to lower down with the hip and knee. Bar stays close to the shins, eyes are going to be on the horizon. I want to get them to stop just at a point where the hips are going to stay a little bit relatively higher than the knee, but also I want them to imagine that they've got some maybe bumper plates on the end of the bar, so they're not just sort of relaxing and folding into that bottom position. At this bottom position, I'm going to give them a couple of cues. First one's going to be shoulders are going to be into the back pocket, so back and down. Knuckles are still going to be pointed down. From that point, bar's going to be sitting over the midfoot. From that setup, as well as everything we've talked about, is obviously the shoulders are still going to stay over the bar. So once we get to that bottom position, we'll then start to work our way back up, where we've started to build a little bit of confidence in terms of positions. So if I get the athlete to move from position 1, position 2, position 3, and they're showing me confidence moving through each position, and they're hitting the correct angles, the mechanics are staying relatively decent, then we'd start to progress them obviously to working the way towards the full movement. A couple of things to look for. Always cover a couple of different angles during observation, because what you might see from the front, you might not be able to see from the side, and vice versa. Especially from the side angles, a couple of things that you could miss is where the shoulders are and relative to the bar, where the weight is in the midfoot, what the hip angle looks like in relation to the knee. There's many things that you might be missing out on if you sort of stuck and looking at one point from the floor. So you could practice some power cleans from just position 3. From there, if you feel like they're okay, but they're still missing position 2, get them to go to position 2, maybe reinforce some pause work, going down from that position, and moving into the power clean, and eventually going from the floor. What I like to do is when I'm moving, or continuing to develop some athletes from that position, I always get them to pause at position 2 before they accelerate into that power clean, because like I mentioned before, a lot of things can go wrong from that sort of first pull. Lack of bracing at the bottom, bar path starts to deteriorate, so normally getting them to reinforce that pause just also reinforces that positional strength and keeping the bar close from position 1 all the way to 2, and then you can increase that speed.